The pills rattled in Maggie Reeves's palm like dice 32 tablets, enough to silence the screaming inside her head. Dawn hadn't broken over the West Virginia hills, and she stood at the old stone well behind her grandmother's abandoned animal rehab center, counting each pill a third time. 3 years since Afghanistan. 3 years since she watched her entire unit die while she lived. The nightmares never stopped. Her hand moved toward her mouth. Then a sound. Not human, guttural, desperate, primal. A scream so raw it tore through the pre-dawn darkness like shrapnel through flesh. The pills scattered into dirt. Maggie's head snapped toward the fence line, her combat training overriding everything else. That sound wasn't just pain, it was pure, distilled agony. She didn't know it yet, but that scream saved her life. What she also didn't know, she'd have to fight heaven and hell to save the life that saved hers. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. 6 months earlier, Maggie Reeves had returned to Appalachia with nothing but a duffel bag and ghosts. 32 years old, honorably discharged from the Army after 2 tours in Afghanistan. She'd served as a combat nurse in places where death arrived faster than hope. The ambush that killed her entire medical unit still played behind her eyelids every night. The explosion, the screaming, the blood she couldn't stop with her bare hands. She was the only one who walked away. Survivor's guilt, the VA doctors called it. Maggie called it slowly dying from the inside out. Her grandmother's property sat on 15 acres of dense West Virginia forest, an hour outside Pineville. The old woman had run an animal rehabilitation center here for decades before passing 2 years ago. Now the kennels stood empty, the medical room gathered dust, and Maggie lived alone with her nightmares and a growing collection of sleeping pills. Her younger brother Carter visited every Sunday without fail. At 29, Carter carried his own scars 8 months in Beckley Correctional for drug possession, a suicide attempt 2 years back that left marks on his wrists he couldn't hide. He'd found something in prison that saved him: a therapy dog program, a German shepherd that visited once a month, sitting with inmates who'd lost hope. Carter never forgot that dog's eyes. 14 months sober now, working at the hardware store in town. He was rebuilding a life from rubble. What neither of them knew was that 20 miles away, another German shepherd was dying slowly in a backyard in hell. Travis Hartwell, 41, mechanic and addict, had purchased the dog from a man at a truck stop 2.5 years ago. Cash deal, no questions. $50. Travis needed a guard dog. What he got was something to hurt when the pills wore off and rage took over. His wife Diane watched it happen, too afraid to intervene, too broken to leave. Their neighbors heard the dog screaming at night. Police came twice. Nothing changed. Then one night, Travis and Diane packed their truck to move to his brother's place in Ohio. The dog was a problem, couldn't take him. Travis drove into the national forest, opened the tailgate, and walked away. Shadow wandered alone for 37 days before collapsing at Maggie's fence line. The screaming came from the old kennels. Maggie ran through the pre-dawn darkness, her bare feet finding the path by muscle memory, flashlight beam cutting through shadows. The sound didn't stop, raw, continuous, the kind of noise that came from a throat that had given up on being heard and was simply releasing pain into the void. She found him pressed against the chain-link fence. And for a moment, her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. The German shepherd was barely recognizable as a dog. His body was completely covered in ticks. Thousands of them, bloated and dark, clustered so thick in places his fur disappeared beneath them. He was skeletal, ribs cutting sharp lines through matted fur, hip bones jutting like knife blades. His eyes were wild with terror and fever. Open wounds wept across his shoulders and flanks. One ear hung at a wrong angle, torn or broken. He weighed maybe 45 pounds. He should have weighed 80. The combat nurse in Maggie kicked in before conscious thought could catch up. Triage assessment: severe malnutrition, dehydration, infection, possible internal injuries, extreme trauma response, critical condition, needed immediate medical intervention or he'd be dead by noon. She took one step forward, The dog lunged at the fence, teeth bared, a sound between a snarl and a sob tearing from his throat. Then he urinated where he stood, a fear response so primal it made Maggie's chest constrict. He wasn't aggressive. He was absolutely terrified. "Easy," she whispered, the same voice she'd used on wounded soldiers who were more scared than hurt. "Easy, boy. Nobody's going to hurt you." The dog pressed himself flatter against the fence, trying to disappear. His whole body shook. When Maggie moved again, he flinched so violently he crashed into the fence post. Yelping, the sound of metal on bone made her stomach turn. She knew abuse when she saw it. The flinching, the cowering, the way he tracked her hands like they were weapons. Someone had beaten this dog within an inch of his life, and then some. Maggie pulled her phone from her pocket. 6:30 in the morning, Carter would be getting ready for work. She called anyway. "Mag, what's wrong?" His voice was alert immediately, trained by years of crisis. "I need you. Now. Bring rope, soft rope, not chain. And whatever meat we have." "On my way." Carter made it from his apartment in town in 23 minutes instead of the usual 40. He took one look at the dog and went pale. "Jesus Christ. We have to get him to a vet, but I can't get near him." They spent the next 3 hours on their knees in the dirt. Carter sat cross-legged 10 feet from the fence, speaking in a low, steady stream of words that meant nothing and everything. Maggie brought water in a bowl, slid it slowly across the ground. The dog watched it like it might explode, too terrified to approach even as his tongue hung swollen with thirst. "Come on, buddy," Carter murmured. "Nobody here's gonna hurt you. Those days are over." He started humming their mother's old lullaby, the one she'd sung when they were kids afraid of storms. The dog's ears twitched, one small sign of recognition in all that fear. 90 minutes in, the dog's legs gave out. He collapsed against the fence, sides heaving, too exhausted to maintain panic. Carter moved incrementally closer, inches at a time, until he was within arm's reach. He kept humming. When his hand finally touched the dog's head, the animal flinched but didn't snap. Too tired to fight anymore. Carter slipped a rope around the dog's neck, soft cotton, loose, not a noose. "Got him." The drive to Mountain View Animal Hospital took 45 minutes. Maggie had called ahead, warning Dr. Sarah Kim what was coming. The dog lay across Maggie's lap in the truck's back seat, trembling so hard his whole body vibrated. His eyes stayed open, tracking every movement, waiting for the next blow that didn't come. Maggie ran her hand gently along his side, feeling the bumps and ridges of embedded ticks beneath her fingers. That's when she felt it, the small, hard bump under the skin behind his shoulder blade. A microchip. "Carter," she said quietly, "he's got a chip. He belongs to someone." Her brother's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. The unspoken question hung between them. What kind of person does this to something they're supposed to protect? The dog whimpered, and Maggie held him closer. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something other than numbness, purpose, direction. A reason to be alive at dawn. She didn't know it yet, but this broken creature was about to save her life by giving her something worth fighting for. Dr. Sarah Kim had been a veterinarian for 15 years, and she'd seen terrible things. But when Carter carried the German Shepherd through her emergency entrance, even she had to steady herself against the exam table. "Get him up here," she said, snapping on gloves. "Gently." The dog didn't resist as they lifted him. He'd moved beyond resistance into a kind of hollow compliance that was somehow worse than fighting. His eyes were glassy with fever. Dr. Kim began her examination with practiced efficiency, her face growing grimmer with each discovery. Over 2,000 ticks. Easily. Severe anemia from blood loss. Multiple infections, some of these wounds are weeks old, malnutrition, dehydration, these fractures. She probed gently along his ribs, his tail. Healed wrong, months old. And these scars on his back. Her voice hardened. consistent with being beaten with something cylindrical, a pipe or bat. Maggie's hands clenched into fists. Carter looked away, jaw tight. There's chemical burns on his paw pads. Doctor, Kim continued. Bleach, maybe. And see these marks on his neck from being chained so tight it cut into the skin. This wasn't neglect. This was systematic torture. Can you save him? Maggie's voice came out rough. We'll try, but I need to scan for that microchip first. The scanner beeped over the dog's shoulder blade. Numbers flashed on the screen. Doctor. Kim entered them into her database, and her expression shifted from anger to confusion. This says he's registered to Valor Service Dogs, Incorporated, Winchester, Virginia. She scrolled down. Original name, Sergeant. Registered 4 years ago as a therapy dog for veteran PTSD treatment programs. She looked up. And he's listed as stolen. Reported missing 3 years ago. The room went silent except for the dog's labored breathing. A therapy dog. Carter's voice was strange, distant. For PTSD. According to this, yes, one of their top performers. Dr. Kim kept reading. Says here the organization shut down 2 years ago due to funding cuts. No current contact information. She met Maggie's eyes. If he was stolen 3 years ago, someone's had him all this time. Maggie was already pulling out her phone, searching. Valor Service Dogs. She scanned articles, her face going pale. They specialized in training dogs for combat veterans, high-level PTSD cases, dogs that could sense panic attacks, night terrors. Carter had gone absolutely still. His face had drained of color. Carter. Maggie looked at her brother. What is it? What did you say his name was? His voice barely above a whisper. Sergeant. Why? Carter's hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone, scrolling frantically through photos, going back through 2 years of pictures. He stopped on one and thrust it toward Dr. T. Kim. The photo showed Carter in prison blues, sitting on a concrete floor. Next to him, a German shepherd with intelligent eyes and alert ears. The placard on the wall behind them read, Beckley Correctional Facility, Therapy Dog Program. That's him, Dr. Kim breathed. That's definitely him. See that marking on his left ear? Same pattern. Carter's voice broke. His name was Sergeant. He came to the prison once a month. I was in a bad place. Really bad. He touched the scars on his wrists unconsciously. The night I tried to kill myself, I'd gotten hold of a razor blade. I was in my cell, bleeding. And this dog, he had to stop. Swallow hard. The handler brought him by for evening rounds. Sergeant smelled the blood, started barking, wouldn't stop until the guard opened my cell. They got me to medical in time because of him. Tears were streaming down his face now. He didn't seem to notice. The handler let him stay with me that night after they patched me up. He laid across my lap for 6 hours, just there, like he knew, like he understood what it felt like to want to disappear. Carter looked at the broken creature on the exam table. That dog saved my life, and I never forgot his eyes. I've thought about him almost every day since. Maggie couldn't breathe. The cosmic impossibility of it that this dog, this specific dog, would collapse at her fence the same morning she'd been holding pills to end it all. That this was the same dog that had kept her brother alive 2 years ago. Doctor. Kim cleared her throat, professional mask slipping to show emotion underneath. Then we fight like hell to save him. But you need to know recovery will take months. He may never fully trust humans again after what he's been through. And the cost. She did quick calculations. Emergency surgery to remove the ticks, blood transfusion, IV fluids, antibiotics, hospitalization. We're looking at $7,500 minimum. I can bring it down to $4,500 if we do it, Maggie said. Whatever it takes. I'll use my savings. I'll cover whatever you can't, Carter added immediately. Doctor, Kim nodded. Okay, but there's something else you need to know. Legally, if the original owner surfaces and can prove ownership, they have the right to claim him back. The law treats pets as personal property. What about what he's been through? Maggie's voice was sharp. Doesn't that matter? Morally, absolutely, legally. Dr. Kim's expression was grim. That's a different question, and not always a fair one. The warning hung in the air, ominous. Right now, let's focus on keeping him alive. Dr. Kim said, we'll worry about the rest later. I need to get him into surgery immediately. This will take at least 6 hours. You should go home. Get some rest. No. Maggie's voice was firm. I'm staying. Carter nodded. We both are. Dr. Kim didn't argue. She began prepping for surgery, calling in her assistant. As they wheeled the dog toward the surgical suite, his eyes found Maggie's one more time. In them, she saw a reflection of her own pain, the kind that came from surviving when part of you believed you shouldn't have. We've got you now, she whispered. You're safe. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of Dr. Kim's warning. In the back of her mind, a terrible question formed. What if the person who did this to him came back to claim what they believed was theirs? The surgery lasted 7 hours. Maggie and Carter sat in the waiting room, drinking bad coffee and not talking. There wasn't much to say. Both of them understood what it meant that this dog, this specific dog, had found them. Some things were too big for words. When Dr. Kim finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, her exhaustion was visible. He made it through. It was touch and go for a while, but he's a fighter. Over 2,000 ticks removed, one by one. 3 blood transfusions. IV lines threaded into veins collapsed from dehydration. The damage catalog was extensive, but the dog's heart kept beating. That was what mattered. He's critical for the next 48 hours, Dr. Kim warned. And he won't eat. We've had to put in a feeding tube. Maggie visited every single day. She'd arrive when the clinic opened and stay until Dr. Kim physically sent her home. The dog, they'd started calling him Shadow, for the way he'd emerged from the forest darkness wouldn't make eye contact. He lay in his kennel, staring at the wall, breathing, but not living. Male staff members couldn't get near him. When Dr. Kim's assistant Jake tried to change his bandages, Shadow's panic response was so violent they had to sedate him. The message was clear: men meant pain. On the 5th day, Maggie brought something from home, her grandmother's old quilt, faded blue with white stars. She'd carried it through 2 tours in Afghanistan, the only piece of home she'd allowed herself. Now she folded it carefully and laid it in Shadow's kennel. For the first time, he lifted his head. His nose twitched, processing the scent. Then, moving like it hurt, he circled 3 times on the quilt and lay down. Within minutes, he was asleep. Real sleep, not the tense half-consciousness he'd maintained since surgery. Dr. Kim watched through the observation window. First peaceful rest he's had since he got here. 2 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Kim approved Shadow's release to Maggie's care. The instructions were extensive wound cleaning twice daily, antibiotics, pain medication, high-calorie diet to rebuild weight, no stress, quiet environment. Carter helped prepare one of the old kennels at the rehab center, transforming it with soft bedding, dim lighting, a space that felt safe rather than trapped. Shadow arrived home and immediately shut down. He wouldn't leave the kennel, wouldn't make eye contact. Refused food for 3 days straight until Maggie had to call Dr. Kim in a panic. He has to choose to live, Dr. Kim said gently. You can't force that. So Maggie stopped forcing. Every morning at 7, she'd drag a chair to a spot 6 feet from Shadow's kennel. She'd sit down with a book and read aloud, sometimes novels, sometimes the newspaper, sometimes just random articles from her phone. Her voice, steady and calm, filling the silence. She'd leave food and walk away. Shadow would wait until she was gone. then eat like he was stealing. Baby steps. Carter visited 3 evenings a week after work. He'd learned to sit far enough away that Shadow didn't panic, close enough that his presence registered. He'd hum that old lullaby, and Shadow's ears would always swivel toward the sound. 4 weeks after bringing Shadow home, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other, something shifted. Maggie was reading some thriller she wasn't really absorbing when she heard movement. Shadow had risen from his bed and walked to the kennel door. Slowly, like testing the floor for landmines, he extended his nose through the bars. His cold, wet nose touched the back of Maggie's hand. The contact lasted maybe 2 seconds before he pulled back, but it was contact. Initiated by him. Chosen. Maggie closed her eyes and let the tears come. It was the first real sign that somewhere inside the trauma, the dog who'd saved Carter in prison still existed. October brought physical healing. Shadow's wounds closed, pink skin replacing angry red. His weight climbed to 58 pounds. Fur grew back in patches, though the tick scars would be permanent reminders. The limp from his old fractures would never fully heal, but he could move without obvious pain. Emotional progress came slower. Shadow began following Maggie from room to room, always maintaining that 6-foot safety buffer. He'd sleep outside her bedroom door at night, a self-appointed guardian. The first time Maggie woke from an Afghanistan nightmare, gasping and disoriented, Shadow was sitting beside her bed. His presence, solid and real, had pulled her back from the edge faster than any medication ever had. On October 15th, Carter brought his guitar. He sat in his usual spot and played soft, simple chords. Shadow, who'd been lying in his kennel, slowly rose and walked closer. 3 feet away, he sat. Then, as Carter's fingers found a gentle melody, Shadow leaned his head against Carter's knee. Carter's hand stilled on the strings. Very slowly, he lowered one hand to Shadow's head. The dog flinched but didn't move away. Carter's fingers touched the soft fur between Shadow's ears. "Hey, buddy," Carter whispered, voice breaking. "I never forgot you. Never." Shadow's tail moved. Not a wag, not yet, but a small, side-to-side sweep that said recognition, memory, connection. Carter cried silently, his shoulders shaking, while Shadow pressed closer, offering the same comfort he'd given in that prison cell 2 years ago. A routine emerged. Morning walks on the property. Shadow on a long lead, jumping at every sound. Afternoons when Maggie did her physical therapy exercises and Shadow watched from his safe distance. Evenings when Carter visited and the 3 of them existed in the same space, building trust incrementally. Shadow began taking food from Maggie's hand. He'd approach, snatch the treat, and retreat, but it was progress. Small victories counted. On October 22nd, they risked a trip to town. Dr. Kim had suggested gradual socialization exposure to the world in controlled doses. Maggie needed supplies from the hardware store where Carter worked, and she brought Shadow along. The dog shook the entire truck ride, pressed against Maggie's side. In the parking lot, he hesitated at every step, scanning for threats that didn't exist. Inside the store, people stared at the scarred German shepherd and the woman who held his leash like a lifeline. "Poor thing," someone murmured. An elderly woman named Linda Martinez approached with good intentions and no understanding. "Oh, what happened to Shadow?" panicked. He backed up so fast the leash burned through Maggie's hand, urinated on the floor, and made a sound between a whimper and a scream. Linda jumped back, startled. "I'm so sorry," Maggie said, already moving toward the exit. "He's been through a lot. We're leaving." Carter caught up with them in the parking lot, helped load Shadow into the truck. The dog was trembling so hard his legs could barely hold him. What they didn't see Travis Hartwell, standing by his truck 3 spaces over, lowering his phone. He'd taken pictures. Lots of them. That scarred, terrified German shepherd looked awfully familiar. Travis sat in his truck after they drove away, scrolling through photos on his phone from 2.5 years ago. They're the dog he'd bought at that truck stop and later dumped in the woods. Same markings on the left ear. Same build under all that damage. His dog. His property. Anger flared hot in his chest. Someone had stolen what was his. That woman had no right. Travis wrote down the license plate number. His jaw tight with resentment and something darker, the need to control, to own, to take back what he'd discarded like trash. He made a decision right there in the hardware store parking lot. He wanted that dog back. November brought real transformation. Shadow's tail wagged regularly now. He played gently with soft toys Carter brought, the kind he couldn't destroy, that wouldn't hurt when he shook them. Most remarkably, he barked. Once, when a delivery truck pulled up to the property, Shadow barked sharp and protective. It was the sound of a dog defending his home, his people. Normal, healthy behavior emerging from beneath layers of trauma. Maggie's nightmares decreased to once or twice a week. For the first time since Afghanistan, she attended the veteran support group in Pineville. Walking into that room full of strangers had felt impossible 6 months ago. Now, with Shadow's presence giving her purpose, she found she could face her own demons while helping him face his. She started talking about reopening her grandmother's rehabilitation center, not just for Shadow, but for other animals who'd been broken and needed time to heal. Shadow had given her a reason to keep breathing. Maybe she could pay that forward. Carter thrived, 17 months sober, promoted to assistant manager at the hardware store. He met a woman named Jessica at his NA meetings, someone who understood the daily choice of recovery. He credited Shadow with keeping him strong. "I have to be the person this dog thinks I am," he told Maggie one evening. "He trusted me again after everything. I can't let him down." By mid-November, Shadow slept curled against Maggie's side every night. He'd allow her to brush his entire coat without flinching. He greeted Carter with full-body wiggles, the closest thing to joy they'd seen from him. On November 20th, he fell asleep with his head in Maggie's lap while she read, snoring softly. They were becoming a family. Broken pieces fitting together, healing in proximity. Then, on November 23rd, the certified letter arrived. Maggie signed for it without thinking. Opened it standing by her mailbox. The law office letterhead seemed official and ominous. She read the first paragraph and her knees went weak. "On behalf of our client, Travis Hartwell, we hereby demand the immediate return of one German Shepherd, male, approximately 4 years old, legally purchased by Mr. Hartwell and unlawfully retained by you." The letter continued with legal language that boiled down to a simple threat. Return the dog within 7 days or face a lawsuit. Attached were photos Shadow as a younger dog, less scarred, and a handwritten receipt claiming purchase from someone named John Miller. Maggie's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. Shadow, sensing her distress, pressed against her legs. She called Dr. Kim first. The answer was what she'd feared. West Virginia treats pets as personal property. If he has documentation of ownership, even a handwritten receipt, that usually holds up in court. The microchip shows he was originally from Valor, but they're defunct. No one to contest his claim. He tortured this dog. Maggie's voice was barely controlled. "I know, but proving that in court, proving he's unfit to own an animal that's incredibly difficult without witnesses or documentation." Maggie called Carter next. He arrived within an hour, read the letter, and his face went white with rage. "We can't let this happen. I don't know if we have a choice." They researched Travis Hartwell, found his arrest record 2 DUIs, multiple domestic disturbance calls, one animal cruelty complaint from 3 years ago that was dismissed for lack of evidence. Neighbors whispered about a previous dog that had disappeared, but no proof existed, nothing solid enough to fight with. The legal reality was stark. Travis had a receipt. He had photos. The law favored his claim to property. Maggie was technically just a foster with no legal standing. The microchip evidence meant nothing if the original organization no longer existed to claim ownership. That night, Maggie and Carter sat in the living room while Shadow slept peacefully between them, unaware his world was about to shatter again. "We could run," Carter said. Just disappear with him. That's kidnapping. Felony charges. I'd go to prison. You'd go back to prison. I'll take him. I'll run alone. I've been to prison before. No. Maggie's voice was firm. I won't let you destroy your life. Not after how far you've come. Then what do we do? Silence. Shadow's gentle snoring. The sound of a life at peace. We fight, Maggie finally said. We find a lawyer. We fight this legally. Carter pulled out his phone, started searching, found Linda Martinez, the woman from the hardware store, was actually a paralegal. He called her, explained everything. She agreed to help research their options and connected them with Marcus Webb, an attorney who sometimes took cases pro bono. The deadline to respond was November 30th. 7 days to find a way to save Shadow from being returned to the man who'd almost killed him. 7 days to prove that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. November 28th arrived cold and gray. Marcus Webb's office occupied the second floor of an old building in downtown Pineville, above a pharmacy that had been there since the 60s. The attorney was 54, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that had seen too many cases where the law failed good people. Linda Martinez sat beside them, legal pad covered in notes. Marcus reviewed the documents spread across his desk, Travis's demand letter, Shadow's medical records, photographs of his condition at rescue. Let me be straight with you, Marcus said after a long silence. Legally, you'll probably lose. The words hit like a physical blow. Maggie felt Carter's hand find hers under the table. He has a bill of sale, dated 2.5 years ago, purchased from someone named John Miller for $200. There's no contact information for this Miller person, which is suspicious, but the receipt exists. He's got photos on his phone of Shadow when he was younger, healthier, in West Virginia. That's usually enough to establish ownership. What about the microchip? Maggie's voice was strained. Shows Shadow was originally registered to Valor Service Dogs, but that organization is defunct. There's no legal entity to contest his claim. And you, Marcus looked at Maggie with sympathy. You only have foster papers, no adoption documentation, no purchase receipt. Legally, you're just temporary caretaker. So he gets to torture animals and the law protects him. Carter's anger was barely contained. The law treats pets as property. It's archaic and it's wrong, but it's reality. Marcus leaned forward. However, there are 2 possible avenues. First, we prove Travis obtained Shadow illegally. That receipt from John Miller, if we can prove it's fraudulent, or that Miller didn't have legal right to sell the dog. We might have something. Second, we prove Travis committed animal cruelty and is unfit to own any animal. Both are incredibly difficult without hard evidence. Witnesses, documentation, something concrete. He paused. But difficult doesn't mean impossible. Over the next 2 days, Carter became an investigator. He found Travis's old address, spent hours knocking on doors. Most neighbors wouldn't talk small-town loyalty, fear of getting involved. But finally, an elderly couple 3 houses down invited him in. George and Martha Patterson were both in their 70s. They'd lived next to Travis for 5 years before he moved. We heard that dog screaming, Martha said, her hands trembling around her teacup. Night after night. We called the police twice. Animal control once. Nobody did anything. George pulled out a worn notebook. I documented it. Every time we heard abuse, dates, times, what we witnessed. He showed Carter pages of careful handwriting. July 2022. Heard yelping. Saw Travis hitting dog with metal pipe in backyard. October 2022. Dog left chained outside in freezing rain. No shelter. Called police. They said it was civil matter. Will you testify in court? Carter asked. The Pattersons looked at each other. Martha nodded. That poor animal deserves someone to speak for him. Carter also tracked down Travis's previous veterinarian. Dr. Ronald Hayes remembered the case that still bothered him. Travis brought in a different dog 3 years ago, shepherd mix. Said the dog got into rat poison. But the symptoms? He shook his head. I suspected deliberate poisoning. Couldn't prove it. The dog died. Travis didn't seem particularly upset. November 30th. Travis demanded a meeting. Against Marcus's advice, Maggie agreed, but insisted it happen at her property with witnesses present. Travis arrived at 2 in the afternoon with his wife Diane, who stood slightly behind him, eyes on the ground. Shadow was in the yard when Travis's truck pulled up. The dog's reaction was immediate and visceral. He began screaming the same sound Maggie had heard that first morning. Pure animal terror. He tried to run, crashed into the fence, urinated and defecated simultaneously. His eyes rolled white with panic. He clawed at his own face, drawing blood, trying to escape a threat that only he could see. Maggie had her phone out, recording everything. "That's my dog," Travis shouted over Shadow's screaming. "See? He remembers me." "He's terrified of you," Maggie said, her voice shaking with rage. "Dogs need discipline. He was always too soft." Carter stepped between Travis and the fence where Shadow continued to panic. "You're not taking him. That's theft. I'll have you both arrested." The argument escalated. Travis's face reddened, veins standing out on his neck. When Diane whispered, "Travis, maybe we should just—" He whirled on her. "Shut your mouth." His hand raised as if to strike her. Carter moved fast, putting himself between them. "Touch her, and we've got a bigger problem." Maggie was already dialing. "Yes, I need police at 1847 Mountain View Road. There's a situation." Travis backed off when he heard police, but his eyes promised violence. He jabbed a finger at Maggie. "Court will handle this. That dog is mine, and you'll pay for every day you've kept him." When Deputy James Morrison arrived, he took statements. He looked at Shadow, still trembling and bloodied from self-inflicted wounds, and his expression was troubled. "This is a civil property dispute," he said finally. "The courts will have to decide." But he also served Travis with a restraining order, no contact with Maggie or Carter, and he couldn't come within 500 feet of the property. Small victory. The court date was set December 15th. 2 weeks to build a case that could overcome property law with morality. Those 2 weeks became a blur of frantic preparation. Dr. Kim compiled detailed medical records, complete with photographs that made people look away. Expert testimony about the specific patterns of long-term abuse injuries in various stages of healing. Psychological trauma indicators. Evidence of systematic torture rather than accidental injury. George and Martha Patterson's testimony would establish pattern of behavior. Dr. Hayes would testify about the suspicious death of Travis's previous dog. Marcus filed subpoenas, gathered evidence, built the strongest case he could from broken pieces, but the case exploded beyond the courtroom. Someone they never learned who posted about it on the Pineville Community Facebook group. The story spread like wildfire. Within days, it had gone regional, then viral. The town divided sharply. Half the population saw it as Maggie had clear case of animal abuse, the law failing basic morality. Petitions circulated. Donations poured in for legal fees, over $12,000 from strangers who'd never met Shadow but recognized injustice. The other half viewed it through a different lens: property rights, government overreach, the dangerous precedent of letting anyone decide someone else's ownership was invalid. "Today it's a dog," one man argued at the diner. "Tomorrow it's your truck, your house. Where does it end?" The rhetoric grew heated. Someone spray-painted "dog thief" across Maggie's garage door. Carter's truck windows were smashed in the hardware store parking lot. Anonymous threats appeared online. "Give back what you stole or face consequences." But supporters rallied too. Veterans from 3 counties showed up to walk the property line. An informal security detail. Linda Martinez organized a legal defense fund. Dr. Kim offered expert testimony pro bono. Local news cameras appeared, then regional outlets. By December 10th, a major network had picked up the story "Veteran Fights to Save Abused Therapy Dog from Original Owner." The attention was crushing. Shadow stopped eating again, stress manifesting in his body. He lost 5 pounds in a week. His nightmares returned, whimpering and thrashing in sleep. He wouldn't leave Maggie's side, glued to her leg like a child afraid of being taken. Maggie's PTSD symptoms surged. Panic attacks she thought she'd conquered came roaring back. She'd wake gasping, reaching for Shadow, needing to confirm he was still there. Carter's sobriety was tested. The stress, the anger, the helplessness, all the triggers he'd spent 17 months learning to manage came at him at once. On December 9th, he called Maggie at midnight. I almost relapsed. I was in the parking lot of a place where I used to buy, had money in my hand. His voice broke. I can't do this, Mag. I can't watch him go back to that monster. Where are you now? Your driveway. I couldn't go through with it, but I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Maggie found him sitting on her porch steps. Shadow, sensing Carter's pain, pressed against him, head in his lap, the same position he'd held in that prison cell years ago when Carter had been bleeding and broken. He needs us strong, Maggie said quietly. Both of us. Carter's hands found Shadow's fur, anchoring himself. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. You already proved that once. And he believed in you then. Believe in yourself now. Shadow licked Carter's face, patient and steady. A therapy dog doing what he was trained to do, recognizing crisis, offering presence, saving lives. On December 10th, Marcus Webb received an unexpected phone call. A woman's voice, quiet and frightened. This is Diane Hartwell. I want to testify against my husband. The meeting happened in secret at a women's shelter 2 counties over. Diane's hands shook as she showed Marcus her old phone, the one Travis didn't know she still had. Photos from 2 years ago. Shadow chained outside in winter, no shelter, surrounded by his own waste. Shadow with visible wounds, ribs showing. One particularly horrific image showed Travis holding a pipe, Shadow cowering. He broke his ribs that day, Diane whispered. Laughed about it, said the dog needed to learn. Why didn't you report this? Marcus asked gently. I tried. Once. He put me in the hospital. She pulled up her shirt sleeve, showed a scar that ran from elbow to shoulder. Said if I ever told anyone anything, he'd kill me. I believed him. Why come forward now? Because I saw that video of Shadow at the fence. When Travis showed up, I saw what we did to him, what I let happen by staying silent. Tears streamed down her face. I can't let him go back. I can't be part of that again. Marcus helped her file for a protective order, arranged safe housing, built her testimony into the case. It was a risk she was terrified Travis would find out, retaliate. But she chose courage anyway. Travis learned of Diane's betrayal through the legal filings. His response was immediate and violent. He posted threats on social media, thinly veiled but clear. On December 13th, he violated the restraining order, driving slowly past Maggie's property 3 times. Arrested, processed, released on bond with a warning from the judge. One more violation and you're sitting in jail until trial. December 15th arrived. The courthouse in Pineville was built in 1947, all heavy wood and high ceilings that amplified sound. By 8 in the morning, people were lined up to get seats. Media crews positioned cameras. Protesters stood on both sides of the entrance, one group with signs reading, "Justice for Shadow," the other with "Property Rights Matter." Judge Patricia Alvarez took the bench at 9 sharp. She was 62, with steel gray hair and a reputation for fairness that made lawyers nervous and clients hopeful. She looked out at the packed courtroom and rapped her gavel once. This is a civil case regarding ownership of one animal. I expect decorum. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Maggie sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus. Shadow lay at her feet. The judge had allowed him in as evidence. The dog wore a service vest Dr. Kim had provided. He was visibly shaking. Travis sat across the aisle with his attorney, Barry Klein, a local lawyer who specialized in property disputes. Travis wore a suit that didn't fit right and an expression of smug confidence. Barry opened by presenting the bill of sale, $200, paid in cash to John Miller on April 3, 2022. He showed the court photos on Travis's phone shadow at roughly 18 months old, healthier, in Travis's backyard. My client legally purchased this dog. The animal ran away as dogs sometimes do. He's been searching for him. When he finally located his property, this woman refused to return it. The law is clear. This is Mr. Hartwell's dog. Travis took the stand. Under Barry's gentle questioning, he painted himself as a loving owner whose pet had escaped. I was devastated when he ran off. I looked everywhere, posted on social media, checked shelters. When I saw him at that hardware store, I knew immediately, that's my dog. Marcus's cross-examination was surgical. You say you searched for him. Did you file a missing animal report with police? No. Did you contact animal control? I didn't think. In the 2.5 years you claim to have owned Shadow, how many times did you take him to a veterinarian? Travis shifted. Dogs don't need vets unless they're sick. No vaccinations, no checkups, no records at all. I take good care of my animals. Regarding your previous dog, the shepherd mix that died 3 years ago, Dr. Hayes suspected poisoning. Can you explain? Objection. Barry jumped up. Irrelevant and prejudicial. Goes to pattern of behavior. Your Honor. Marcus countered. Judge Alvarez considered. I'll allow it. Travis's face reddened. That dog got into rat poison. Wasn't my fault. Yeah, Marcus let the lie hang in the air. Then he played the video from November 30th. Shadow's screaming filled the courtroom. People in the gallery gasped. The dog's terror was impossible to deny. Even Judge Alvarez looked disturbed. This is Shadow's reaction to seeing you. Does this look like a dog greeting his loving owner? He was always skittish. Travis muttered, but his confidence was cracking. Maggie's case began with Dr. Kim's testimony. She described Shadow's condition at intake in clinical detail that made several jurors look away. The photographs were worse. A woman in the front row cried quietly. In my 15 years as a veterinarian, this is the worst case of systematic abuse I've encountered. These injuries occurred over an extended period. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate torture. George and Martha Patterson testified next, Martha clutching her husband's hand as she described the sounds they'd heard. The police calls that went nowhere. George presented his notebook. Years of documented abuse. Then Diane took the stand. The courtroom went silent. She was pale, trembling, but her voice was steady. I lived with Travis for 6 years. I watched him hurt that dog almost daily. He used a metal pipe. He'd chain Shadow outside for days with no food or water. He thought it was funny when the dog cried. Travis erupted. You lying? He started to rise from his chair. Mr. Hartwell. Judge Alvarez's voice cracked like thunder. Sit down or you will be held in contempt. The bailiff moved closer to Travis. He sat, but his face was twisted with rage. Diane continued, showing the photos from her hidden phone, each image more damning than the last. He broke Shadow's ribs on purpose. He burned his paws with bleach. And when I tried to stop him, she pulled up her sleeve, showed the scar. This is what he did to me. The courtroom was completely silent except for Diane's quiet crying. Carter testified about meeting Shadow in prison, about the suicide attempt, about the dog who'd saved his life. This dog was trained to help veterans with PTSD. He did his job perfectly. And someone stole him from that calling. Put him in hell for 3 years. Please don't send him back there. Finally, Maggie took the stand. She looked at Shadow, who hadn't taken his eyes off her since they'd entered the courthouse. I was going to kill myself the morning I found him, she said simply. I had the pills in my hand, and I heard him screaming. That sound, it was the same sound I'd been making inside for 3 years. We recognized each other's pain. He gave me a reason to stay alive. We saved each other. Her voice broke. Please don't separate us. As if on cue, Shadow stood. He walked to Maggie the first time he'd moved voluntarily since entering the courtroom. He placed one paw on her foot, leaning against her leg. His dark eyes never left her face. The gesture was so simple, so profound, that even Judge Alvarez had to look away for a moment. Recess, she said, her voice rough. 30 minutes. I need to review the evidence. Those 30 minutes stretched like hours. Maggie held Shadow in the hallway while Carter paced. Marcus reviewed his notes. Face unreadable. Inside the courtroom, Judge Alvarez sat alone with two competing claims, the letter of the law versus the spirit of justice. When they reconvened, the room buzzed with tension. Judge Alvarez looked tired. This court has heard compelling testimony from both sides, she began. Judge Alvarez returned to the bench after what felt like an eternity, but was only 30 minutes. The courtroom fell silent as she adjusted her reading glasses and looked out at the packed gallery. Her expression was unreadable. This court has heard compelling testimony from both sides, she began. The evidence of animal cruelty is disturbing and deeply troubling. The photographs, the medical records, the witness accounts all paint a picture of systematic abuse that no creature should endure. Hope flickered in Maggie's chest. Carter gripped her hand. However, the single word landed like a hammer. This court must apply the law as written, not as we might wish it to be. West Virginia Code is clear regarding personal property disputes. Mr. Hartwell has presented a bill of sale dated April 3, 2022. While the circumstances surrounding this purchase are suspicious, it is a legal document. Ms. Reeves holds only foster papers, which do not establish ownership. Maggie's vision blurred. Despite this court's moral concerns about Mr. Hartwell's fitness as an animal owner, the law does not grant judicial authority to void legitimate ownership based on ethical objections. That power rests with the legislature. Judge Alvarez paused, her voice softening slightly. Therefore, this court finds in favor of plaintiff Travis Hartwell. Defendant Margaret Reeves is hereby ordered to return the animal known as Shadow to Mr. Hartwell's custody within 24 hours of this ruling. The courtroom exploded. Shouts of outrage mixed with scattered applause. Maggie couldn't breathe. The room spun. Shadow, sensing the chaos, began barking frantically, straining against his leash. Order. Judge Alvarez's gavel cracked repeatedly. I am not finished. Ms. Reeves, failure to comply will result in contempt charges, fines, and possible jail time. Sheriff Morrison will enforce this order if necessary. Mr. Webb, you may file an appeal, but it will not stay this ruling. The transfer must occur as ordered. Maggie collapsed forward, forehead hitting the table. Carter's arm wrapped around her shoulders as his other hand punched the table hard enough that knuckles split. Marcus was already gathering papers, his face grim, speaking urgently about emergency appeals and injunctions, but the words meant nothing. Across the aisle, Travis stood with a smirk plastered across his face. Told you he's mine, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Maggie barely made it to the courthouse bathroom before vomiting. She knelt on the cold tile floor, retching until nothing was left, while concerned strangers asked if she needed help. She couldn't answer, couldn't form words. Outside, Diane stood sobbing in the parking lot. I tried, she kept saying to anyone who would listen. I tried to tell the truth. I'm so sorry. The drive home was silent. Shadow sat in the back seat, head on Maggie's lap, somehow understanding that something terrible had happened. When they pulled into the driveway, he didn't want to leave the truck. Maggie carried him inside. That night passed in surreal slow motion. Maggie didn't sleep. Couldn't. She sat on the living room floor with Shadow in her arms, holding him like he might disappear if she loosened her grip. She whispered apologies into his fur until her voice went hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I failed you. I promised you were safe and I lied." Shadow didn't sleep either. He licked her tears, pressed his head under her chin, and periodically whined a sound that broke something fundamental in Maggie's chest. At 3 a.m, Carter's truck pulled up. He came inside without knocking, his right hand wrapped in a makeshift bandage from punching the courthouse wall. He sat down beside them without speaking. The three of them stayed that way until dawn began to lighten the windows. "We could run," Carter finally said. "Right now. Just disappear. I know places. We could... They'd find us." Maggie's voice was dead. "You'd go back to prison. I'd go to prison. I'll do it alone then. I'll take him and run. I've been to prison before. I can..." "No." Maggie looked at her brother. "I won't let you destroy everything you've built. Not for this." "Then what?" Carter's voice broke. "We just give him back to that monster." The silence was answer enough. Dr. Kim could... Maggie couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of euthanasia, of choosing death over returning to Travis, had crossed her mind a dozen times that night. But when she'd called, Dr. Kim had been firm. "I won't kill a healthy dog. I can't be part of that." Shadow seemed to sense something was ending. He paced between the door and Maggie, whining, looking back at her as if asking, "Aren't we leaving? Isn't there somewhere we can go?" He brought his toys one by one, the border collie, the rope, the squeaky ball, and dropped them at her feet like offerings. "Please play with me. Please let's pretend everything is normal." They played at dawn. Carter threw the rope toy and Shadow fetched it, tail wagging, and the normalcy of it was devastating. This might be the last time he ever played. At 6, Maggie made her decision. She couldn't run, couldn't break the law, no matter how unjust it felt. But she could document everything. File new complaints. Keep fighting through legal channels, however broken they seemed. "But I have to let him go today," she told Carter. "I have no choice." She packed Shadow's belongings with trembling hands, the grandmother's quilt he'd slept on since that first breakthrough, his toys, his medications and food. She wrote detailed care instructions in careful handwriting, knowing Travis would probably throw them away. At 11:30, Sheriff Morrison arrived. His face was gray with sympathy. "Maggie, I'm sorry. I have to enforce the order." "I know." Travis's truck pulled up at 11:45. The moment Shadow saw it, he began screaming the same primal guttural sound from that first morning at the fence. Full circle. The sound that had saved Maggie's life was now the soundtrack to his death sentence. Maggie tried to hold him, but Shadow was fighting, clawing, trying to run. Sheriff Morrison had to help separate them. Shadow's claws left deep gouges in the wooden floor as he was dragged toward the door. "I'm sorry," Maggie sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I love you." Travis grabbed Shadow roughly by the collar and hauled him to the truck. He threw the dog into the bed, not even inside the cab, just exposed in the back. As the truck pulled away, Shadow's eyes locked on Maggie through the rear window. His screaming echoed long after the truck disappeared from sight. Then silence. Maggie stood frozen in her empty living room. Shadow's food bowl sat on the floor. His toys were scattered everywhere. The grandmother's quilt was gone. The house felt dead. Carter tried to reach her, but she couldn't respond. Couldn't move. Something inside her had shut down completely. That night, she walked back to the stone well, the same place she'd been standing when Shadow's screams had first reached her, the same bottle of pills in her hand. This time, she poured them into her palm, counted them, raised her hand toward her mouth. No. Carter appeared from the darkness, sprinting. He grabbed her wrist, and pills scattered across the ground. They struggled, but he was stronger. "You think Shadow would want this?" Carter shouted. He fought to survive. You have to fight for him. Maggie collapsed in her brother's arms and finally broke down completely. The sobs that tore from her chest were primal, animal sounds that matched Shadow's screams. This was the darkest moment, the point where hope had been extinguished and only ashes remained. But sometimes, ashes are what new fires are built from. The certified letter from the court clerk arrived at 6 in the morning on December 16th. Maggie's hands shook as she opened it. Shadow pressed against her legs. She read the first paragraph and the floor seemed to drop away. Pursuant to West Virginia Code regarding personal property disputes, the court finds in favor of plaintiff Travis Hartwell. Defendant Margaret Reeves is hereby ordered to return said animal to Mr. Hartwell's custody within 24 hours of this notice, effective immediately. The words blurred. Shadow whined, sensing her distress. Judge Alvarez's written opinion was attached. Despite acknowledging the abuse evidence, despite Diane's testimony and Dr. Kim's expert analysis, the law was clear. Travis had documentation of purchase. The bill of sale, however suspicious, was a legal document. Maggie had only foster papers. In property disputes, documented ownership prevailed. The judge had added a personal note at the end. This court is deeply troubled by the evidence of animal cruelty presented. However, the law does not grant this court authority to void legitimate ownership based on moral concerns. The legislature, not the judiciary, must address the inadequacy of current animal welfare statutes. A technical legal victory built on a foundation of torture. Carter arrived within 20 minutes of Maggie's call. His face was gray. We could run. Right now. Just disappear. They'd find us. You'd go back to prison. I'd go to prison. Maggie's voice was hollow. And Shadow would still end up back with him. Marcus Webb called at 7. I'm filing an emergency appeal, but it will take weeks, maybe months. Meanwhile, the order stands. If you don't comply by noon tomorrow, Sheriff Morrison will enforce it. You could face contempt charges, fines, even jail time. The next 18 hours were the longest of Maggie's life. She held Shadow, memorizing the feel of his heartbeat, the softness of his fur, the way he leaned his full weight against her like she was the only solid thing in a world of quicksand. At 11:30 on December 17th, Sheriff Morrison arrived. He looked miserable. Maggie, I'm sorry. I have to enforce the order. Travis's truck pulled up 5 minutes later. Shadow saw it and began screaming that primal sound of pure terror. He tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Maggie held him, tears streaming, whispering apologies into his fur. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I'm so sorry. Travis grabbed Shadow by the collar, rough and impatient. The dog fought, claws scraping on the floor, leaving marks in the wood. Travis dragged him to the truck and threw him in the bed, not even inside the cab, just exposed in the back. Shadow's eyes locked on Maggie as the truck pulled away. His screaming faded into the distance until there was only silence. Maggie stood frozen in her yard. The house felt dead. Shadow's bowl still sat on the floor, his toys scattered across the living room, the grandmother's quilt she'd never see again. That night, Carter found her at the well, the same place she'd been standing when Shadow's screams had first reached her. She was holding the pill bottle again. Don't, Carter said quietly. Please don't. What's the point? Her voice was flat, empty. I couldn't save him. I can't save anyone. He needs us to fight. Even if we lost in court, we don't stop fighting. How the law says he belongs to Travis. It's over. Carter pulled out his phone. No, it's not over. He'd driven to Travis's house after the transfer, parked down the road with binoculars, documenting everything. The videos on his phone showed Shadow chained to a tree in the backyard. No shelter, no water bowl visible. Hours passed. Shadow didn't move. Then, around 8 that evening, Travis came home, Carter's video captured audio yelling, the sound of something hitting flesh, shadows yelping. Carter had called 911 immediately. Police arrived, but the responding officers said the same thing they always did. It's his property. Unless there's life-threatening injury, it's a civil matter. Travis knew exactly how far he could go without crossing into criminal territory. At 1 a.m, Carter made a decision. He climbed Travis's fence, found Shadow barely breathing in the backyard, new wounds, fresh blood. The dog's eyes were glazed, consciousness fading. Carter didn't hesitate. He picked Shadow up and ran. Dr. Kim answered her door in pajamas, took one look at Shadow and said, "Operating room, now." The injuries were severe. Internal bleeding, broken ribs again, head trauma causing concussion. Travis had beaten Shadow within an inch of his life within hours of getting him back. At 6 that morning, Carter called Sheriff Morrison and confessed to breaking and entering. "Arrest me if you want, but I saved his life. Watch my videos. See what Travis did." The videos went viral within hours. Major news networks picked them up. The public outrage was immediate and massive. Protests erupted at the courthouse. Pressure mounted on Judge Alvarez, on the prosecutor's office, on anyone with authority to do something. But it was December 18th that everything changed. Sheriff Morrison and 2 state police officers arrived at Travis's house at 7 a.m. with a warrant. They'd spent the night analyzing Carter's surveillance footage, cross-referencing with Diane's testimony and the Pattersons' documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. Multiple felony counts of animal cruelty. During the search of Travis's home, they found his ownership documents on a computer, poorly edited digital files. The bill of sale was a forgery, a crude Photoshop job that fell apart under forensic analysis. John Miller had never existed. The signature was traced from a clip art image. The date stamps in the file metadata showed it had been created just 2 weeks ago after Travis saw Shadow at the hardware store. Travis had never legally owned Shadow. He'd purchased the dog from someone else, someone who'd stolen him. Every piece of documentation presented in court was fraud. By 9 that morning, Travis was in custody, charged with multiple felonies: animal cruelty, perjury, forgery, receipt of stolen property. The prosecutor, embarrassed by the public attention and the missed fraud, threw everything they could at him. Judge Alvarez called an emergency hearing for that afternoon. The courtroom was even more packed than before. She didn't waste time. In light of new evidence showing that Mr. Hartwell's ownership documents were fraudulent, this court's previous ruling is void. Mr. Hartwell had no legal claim to the animal in question. The courtroom erupted in cheers. The judge's gavel cracked repeatedly. "Order! We are not finished." The state police had done more digging. Shadow's theft 3 years ago had been part of a larger criminal enterprise, an organized ring stealing service dogs from training facilities and selling them on the black market. Service dogs were valuable, could sell for thousands of dollars to the right buyers. Travis had paid $200 to a dealer at a truck stop who'd asked no questions. The FBI was now involved. Federal crime. Service animal theft violated multiple statutes. But the question remained, who did Shadow belong to? Now Marcus stood to present Maggie's case for adoption when the courtroom doors opened. An elderly woman walked in, moving slowly with a cane. She was perhaps 70, with white hair and piercing blue eyes. She approached the bench. "Your Honor, I'm Helen Garcia. I founded Valor Service Dogs. I believe I can provide clarity regarding this animal's legal status." Judge Alvarez gestured her forward. Helen opened a worn folder, pulling out documents that dated back 4 years. "This dog's registered name is Sergeant. He was one of our most exceptional therapy dogs, specifically trained for veterans with combat-related PTSD. His first placement was with a young man named Ethan Brooks, 23 years old, Army veteran with severe trauma from his deployment." Helen's voice grew softer. Ethan and Sergeant were inseparable. The dog gave him stability, helped manage his panic attacks and night terrors. For 2 years, they were partners. She paused, visibly emotional. Ethan took his own life 4 years ago. His widow, Sarah Brooks, couldn't keep Sergeant afterward. Every time she looked at him, she saw her husband. The grief was unbearable. She returned Sargent to our facility for reassignment. She showed the court photos a young man with haunted eyes and a German shepherd pressed close to his side. The bond between them was visible even in still images. We were retraining Sargent for a new placement when he was stolen from our facility. We reported it immediately, but the trail went cold. Helen looked at Shadow, who was lying beside Maggie's chair. Recognition flickered in the old dog's eyes. When Valor lost our funding and had to close, I maintained ownership of all our dogs as trustee, which means, legally, Sargent still belongs to me, or rather, to the Valor Trust. She turned to face Maggie. I've spent the last few days reviewing this case, reading about what this dog endured, what he survived, and what he's doing now. Helen walked slowly to where Shadow lay. The dog's tail began to wag, not enthusiastically, but a gentle recognition. She knelt with difficulty, ran her hand over his scarred head. Sargent was trained to save lives. That was his calling, his gift. She looked up at Maggie. He saved a young veteran named Carter Reeves in prison. He saved you when you were at your lowest point. He's still doing exactly what Ethan loved him for, giving broken people a reason to keep breathing. Helen stood, addressing Judge Alvarez directly. As trustee of Valor Service Dogs, I have legal authority to place this dog where I believe he can best fulfill his purpose. Ms. Reeves, if you're willing, she turned to Maggie, I'd like to officially transfer ownership of Sargent to you. He's found his mission. He's found his home. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Maggie couldn't speak through her tears. She nodded. Then it's done. Helen pulled out pre-prepared adoption papers, signed them right there. Marcus added his witness signature. Judge Alvarez accepted the documents into the court record. This court recognizes the legal transfer of ownership from the Valor Trust to Margaret Reeves. All previous claims are void. The gavel came down with finality. This matter is concluded. The courtroom exploded into applause. Carter was crying openly. Dr. Kim was hugging Linda Martinez. Shadow, sensing the shift in energy, stood and pressed against Maggie's legs. He was safe. He was legally hers. No one could take him away again. The evening of December 18th felt like stepping into a different world. Maggie and Carter brought Shadow home for the second time, but everything had changed. There was no fear of separation now, no looming threat, just relief so profound it felt physical. Shadow knew. Dogs always know. His tail wagged weakly as they helped him from the truck, careful of his injuries. He limped to the porch, turned to look at both of them, and for the first time since the nightmare began, his whole body relaxed. That night, Shadow slept between Maggie and Carter on the living room floor, both of them refusing to leave him. His paw rested on Maggie's hand all night. When she woke from an old nightmare around 3 in the morning, Shadow was already there, nose pressed to her cheek, grounding her in the present. All three of them slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Helen Garcia visited 2 days later, bringing a cardboard box that smelled of old paper and memories. Inside were Shadow's original training records from Valor certifications, behavioral assessments, photographs spanning his puppyhood through his work as a therapy dog. He was exceptional even as a puppy, Helen said, spreading photos across Maggie's kitchen table. Empathetic beyond measure. He could sense a panic attack before the person experiencing it knew it was coming. One photo stopped Maggie's breath. A young man with dark circles under his eyes and a hesitant smile sat on the floor. Shadow pressed tight against his side. Both of them looked like they were holding on to the only solid thing in a crumbling world. That's Ethan Brooks, Helen said softly. 23 years old. He came back from Afghanistan barely holding himself together. Shadow was assigned to him right after certification. They were inseparable for 2 years. She touched the photo gently. Ethan used to say Shadow could feel his pain before he could. The dog would wake him from nightmares, interrupt panic attacks, physically block him from self-harm. "What happened?" Maggie asked, though she already knew. "Ethan took his own life 4 years ago. His wife Sarah couldn't keep Shadow afterward. The grief was too much. She returned him to us for reassignment." Helen's eyes were wet. "We were training him for a new veteran when he was stolen. I've spent 3 years wondering what happened to him, hoping he was alive somewhere." She looked at Shadow, sleeping peacefully on his quilt. "Now I know. He found his way back to his calling. He saved Carter. He saved you. That's what he was born to do." Helen gave Maggie the framed photo of Ethan and Shadow. "Keep this. Honor his first mission." Maggie hung it in the living room where Shadow could see it. Sometimes she'd catch him staring at the image, head tilted, as if remembering something just beyond reach. The next 2 weeks were focused on healing again. Shadow's new injuries required the same careful attention as before. Dr. Kim provided care at cost, refusing to accept the full payment Maggie offered. "Some things matter more than money," she said simply. The community response was overwhelming. The viral videos and news coverage had brought attention from across the country. Donations flooded in over $50,000 within a week, more than enough to cover all medical expenses, past and present. Maggie set aside the excess for a dream that was beginning to take shape. Travis Hartwell's trial was swift. Faced with mountains of evidence, Carter's videos, Diane's testimony, the Pattersons' documentation, forensic proof of his forgery, his attorney negotiated a plea deal, 3 years in prison, 5 years probation upon release, and a lifetime ban on owning any animals. Diane filed for divorce the day Travis was sentenced. She moved to a town 2 hours away, started fresh with a new job and her own apartment. She visited Maggie once in late January, carrying flowers and apologies. "I should have spoken up sooner," she said, tears streaming. "I should have protected him." Shadow, who had every reason to fear her, walked up slowly and let her pet him. His forgiveness was immediate and complete. Diane sobbed, whispering thank yous into his fur. She was building a new life, one choice at a time. Small redemptions mattered too. Winter brought steady healing. Shadow gained weight, reaching 72 pounds by February. His fur grew back completely, though the scars remained permanent maps of survival. His limp would never fully disappear. But he could run now, could play. Joy returned to his eyes. Maggie's transformation was equally profound. Her PTSD symptoms decreased dramatically. Nightmares became rare occurrences rather than nightly torture. She began attending veteran support groups regularly, even started training to become a peer counselor. "Shadow showed me healing is possible," she told other veterans. "If he can rebuild trust after what he survived, so can we." Carter thrived. 21 months sober by March, a milestone he celebrated quietly with Jessica, the woman from his recovery meetings who'd become his partner. He got promoted to assistant manager at the hardware store, moved into his own small house. Shadow visited weekly, their bond as strong as ever. The dog's personality emerged fully as safety became permanent. He was playful, loving fetch and tug-of-war with Carter. He was gentle, his therapy dog training still evident in how he approached people. He was protective, barking at strangers but never aggressive. And he was brave proof that trauma doesn't have to be permanent. By early spring, Maggie had made her decision. Her grandmother's property would become what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary for broken things, learning to be whole again. Shadow's Haven opened on April 15th. The renovated Animal Rehabilitation Center focused specifically on abused and traumatized animals, creatures that needed more than medical care, that needed time and patience and understanding that healing isn't linear. The grand opening drew a crowd. Local officials, media, volunteers who'd supported them through the legal battle. Helen Garcia cut the ribbon alongside Maggie, with Shadow sitting between them wearing a bow tie Carter had insisted on. The first residents arrived within days, 3 dogs and 2 cats, all abuse cases. Shadow appointed himself their therapist, teaching them through example that humans could be trusted again. Watching him gently approach a terrified pit bull, lying down to make himself smaller and less threatening. Maggie understood his purpose completely. A regional filmmaker created a short documentary about their story. It aired on a major network in May, inspiring similar rescue operations across the country. Maggie received hundreds of messages from veterans who'd seen themselves in her struggle, who'd found hope in Shadow's survival. On May 10th, Maggie brought Shadow to a veteran support group meeting. He was now a certified therapy dog, wearing his vest with quiet dignity. A young veteran named Marcus was having a severe panic attack in the corner, hyperventilating and unable to ground himself. Shadow went to him immediately, without prompting. He laid across Marcus's lap, a warm, steady weight. The young man's breathing slowed. His hands found Shadow's fur and held on. Later, Marcus told Maggie, "I was thinking about killing myself today. That dog he knew. He pulled me back." Full circle. Ethan to Shadow to Carter to Maggie to Marcus. An unbroken chain of lives saved by one remarkable dog who refused to let trauma destroy his capacity for love. Helen returned in late May to see what Shadow's haven had become. She walked the property, met the animals in care, watched Shadow work with a terrified German Shepherd puppy who was learning that not all humans hurt. "Ethan would be so proud," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. Then she told Maggie that Sarah Brooks, Ethan's widow, wanted to meet Shadow. She hadn't seen him since returning him to Valor 4 years ago, hadn't been ready. But now, hearing about everything he'd survived and everything he was doing, she needed to see him one more time. They arranged it for Memorial Day weekend. Sarah arrived with her 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 8. She was nervous, hands trembling as she stepped out of her car. Shadow was in the yard with Maggie. The moment he saw Sarah, he froze. Then recognition hit pure and immediate. He ran to her, faster than Maggie had ever seen him move, tail wagging so hard his whole back end wiggled. He jumped up, breaking every training rule, and licked her face frantically. Sarah collapsed to her knees, holding him, sobbing. "You remember me. Oh God, you remember." Her children hugged Shadow carefully, remembering the dog from when they were tiny. Shadow was gentle with them, patient, his tail never stopping. Sarah looked up at Maggie through tears. "I couldn't keep him after Ethan died. Every time I saw him, I saw my husband. The grief was crushing. Giving him back was the hardest thing I ever did. But now," she gestured at the property, the healing animals, Shadow's obvious joy. "He was meant for this. He saved Ethan for as long as he could. Now he's saving others." She pulled a small box from her pocket. Inside were Ethan's military dog tags. He'd want Shadow to have these, a reminder of his first mission. Maggie attached them to Shadow's collar. The metal tags clinked softly against his name tag, past and present together. June 1st dawned clear and warm. Maggie woke to Shadow's wet nose nudging her hand, their morning ritual. She smiled, scratching behind his ears, feeling the solid realness of him. After breakfast, she walked to the old stone well, the place where she'd stood with pills in hand, ready to end everything. She knelt beside it now, planting flowers, bright yellows and purples that her grandmother would have loved. Shadow lay in the grass nearby, face turned to the sun, completely at peace. Maggie sat back, looking at him. The scars were still visible, would always be visible. But they told a story of survival, not defeat, of healing, not breaking. "You saved me before I saved you," she said softly. Shadow's tail thumped twice against the ground. Carter's truck pulled up the driveway, Jessica in the passenger seat. They'd brought lunch for their weekly family dinner. Shadow bounded over to greet them, wiggling with happiness. They sat on the porch as evening approached, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. 27 animals had come through Shadow's haven in 5 months, all successfully rehabilitated, all adopted to loving homes. 6 more were currently in care. The waiting list was 15 deep. Shadow visited the Veterans Hospital monthly now. He'd worked with over 40 veterans with PTSD. 3 had written letters crediting him with preventing their suicides. Ethan's legacy lived on. Maggie watched Shadow sleep that night, Ethan's dog tags glinting in the lamplight, the grandmother's quilt beneath him, surrounded by people who loved him. His scars visible, but his spirit unbroken. She addressed the silence, speaking to anyone who needed to hear it. People ask me who saved who. I found Shadow screaming by that fence, covered in ticks, dying. But I was dying too, just on the inside. We saved each other. That's what love does. That's what second chances look like. The next morning, Shadow woke her with his usual gentle insistence. Another day, another chance to heal, to help, to prove that the worst things that happen to us don't have to define us. Outside, the sign read, Shadow's Haven, where broken souls heal together, and every single day. Maggie was grateful she'd heard his screams that morning, because they'd woken her up in more ways than one. They'd given her back her life by asking her to save his. Sometimes the life you save ends up saving you right back. This story reminds us that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when you're broken and stays until you're whole. Maggie, Carter, and Shadow found each other at their lowest points. 3 shattered souls who became each other's reason to keep fighting. The lesson here, Cuts Deep Gratitude, isn't just about saying thank you. It's about honoring the second chances we're given by becoming who we need to be for others. Shadow could have remained broken, untrusting, defeated by his trauma. Instead, he chose to keep saving lives because that's what love does. It transforms pain into purpose. Carter stayed sober because Shadow believed in him. Maggie found meaning because Shadow needed her. And Shadow healed because 2 people refused to give up on him, even when the law said they should. Real family fights for each other. They break rules when rules protect cruelty. They sacrifice comfort for what's right. They hold on when letting go would be easier. The greatest injustice in this story wasn't just that Travis tortured Shadow. It was that the legal system almost sent him back to his abuser simply because paperwork said so. Have you ever witnessed the law protecting someone who was clearly in the wrong? Have you ever had to choose between following rules and doing what's right? Share your story below.